Okay, grade 9, this is lesson number 9, sexual selection. This is our last lesson on natural selection specifically, and we're going to be looking at other parameters of evolution after this. So that means after today you'll have enough information to talk very thoroughly about big idea number 3. So pause the video and write down in your notebook, big idea number 3, how does natural selection occur? And when you answer it after today's lesson, make sure you have very thorough answers and examples, including the 4 principles. Okay, so take some time to really write a very thorough answer for that. The big ideas are really key to your unit test, and of course the most important things from this unit. So make sure that you bring them together and give really good answers to them. Okay, here's the template for today's lesson. So you have an image here of a process to draw. Here you have a graph, and here there's no images. You need about a third of the page for each. It's not very well divided here, but about a third of the page for each section should be enough. So pause the video and make your template. Okay, so let's start by talking about energy and reproduction. So this lesson is about sexual selection, so that's about reproduction in terms of selection, and natural selection specifically. So we're going to talk about the difference between sexual and asexual selection first to kind of set the stage for this. It won't make sense without understanding this part first. So, have you heard the term sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction before? Think about what the prefix A means in terms of English language. Well, in sexual reproduction, it involves 2 parents combining their genetic material. So we have parent 1, the mother, and the father combining their DNA to make a fertilized zygote, this is a fertilized egg, which produces an embryo, which eventually produces a baby. Which species do this? How many can you think of? Not just humans, but a few other ones. Try and think of a few other examples as well. And the other extreme, the other kind of opposite of this is asexual. Remember the prefix A, if you don't remember, means not or non. So asexual is non-sexual reproduction. And that's what's happening here. It's where you have a single organism and it's going to make an offspring, but instead of connecting its DNA with other organisms, it's going to make just a clone of itself. So here we have an amoeba. And it's going to copy its DNA, so it's 2 copies, and just split its nucleus in half, its plasma in half, and now we have 2 different amoebas at the end that are identical, and those are called the daughter cells. So amoebas are one type of species that does this. Can you think of any other species that do this? Well, bacteria are a good example of other ones that do, and archaeans, which are kind of similar to bacteria, live in very extreme environments like deep sea vents, very salty water, that kind of stuff. All those kind of early prokaryotes do this. Some other types of protists do this, like euglena, like paramecium, other kinds of organisms like that. Okay, so we have sexual, combining 2 different DNAs, and we have asexual, copying 1 DNA. This is the image you need to draw, because I think everyone has an idea really clearly what sexual reproduction is. But here, might be a newer process for you, so please draw this out. I'm sure it's in amoeba as an example. Okay, so both of those different strategies, sexual and asexual, have different benefits in terms of evolution. Can you think of the benefits of those, sexual and asexual reproduction? So in asexual, it's much more energy efficient than sexual reproduction. It's only 1 individual. They just have to copy their DNA, get a little bigger, divide in 2. That is very energy efficient compared to the energy required in sexual. So why is that particularly good? Why is it good to be saving energy? Well, if you're saving energy from reproduction, you don't have to spend it on that. You can use it for other things, getting food, escaping predators, growing, surviving, all those kinds of things. So in terms of evolution, anything that's going to help you keep energy is an advantage. So if it can save energy by reducing that way, that's a good thing. But sexual reproduction is very common, and the reason why it's so common is because it increases genetic variation. So organisms who reproduce sexually are automatically going to have increased genetic variation compared to those who reproduce asexually. Why is that good? Well, one of the 4 principles of natural selection is variation. So if we don't have variation, there's going to be no way to have individuals that are different than each other, and then no way for them to evolve and adapt. So in things like bacteria and amoeba, there will be some variation, but it's from mutations, mistakes that are made in copying the DNA. And the frequency of them is very, very low compared to the amount of variation in a sexually reproducing organism. So for example, if you have siblings or your parents have lots of siblings, think about the variation from those parents. I have a brother and a sister, and we have the same parents, and we do not look exactly the same. We are different, even though we came from the same DNA from our parents, because such variation, sexual reproduction automatically increases variation. Because you're only taking half the DNA from dad, half from mom, and which half you get from each will be different with every individual, every offspring, every child. But sexual reproduction has a big downfall, and that's energy. It takes a lot more energy for sexual reproduction, especially for the female. Why is this? Well, if you look at these pictures here, I've found some pretty cute animals that are pregnant. The gestation period for different organisms can be very, very long, up over a year for some organisms, and that's a big energy cost for that female. Like this zebra right here, it's not going to be able to run away from a lion very well when it's that big and heavy, right? So it's a higher risk for the female. She's using her own energy to be able to produce the baby, to grow the baby or babies, and then probably feed them after they come out. There's a lot more energy being used here, and it's mostly on the female, right? In most of these species, the male just has to reproduce, and then he's done, and he can move on. So the energy sharing for reproduction and sexual reproduction is very uneven, and that's had a big influence in sexual selection. So let's talk a little bit about survivorship. This is the graph you need to draw. You should have a pretty clear idea. This is the first curve, get the curve chart, and the opposite is curve 3, and the middle line is 2. Okay? Make sure you label your axes correctly as well. So this uneven energy thing in sexual reproduction continues for most species, or many species, after birth as well. So in many species, the parents continue after birth with parental care as well. In some species, it's the males that do it, some it's the females, some it's a mix of both. It depends on the species. But this also costs energy, right? Instead of ensuring your particular survival as an individual, that organism is now focused on the survival of their offspring. Why would that be maybe worth the effort? Well, one of the big tenets of natural selection is passing on the DNA, right? The fourth parameter is set modification. If your offspring survive, then your DNA will be passed on. If your offspring don't survive, it'll be passed on. So the goal as part of that whole process is to get your offspring old enough to produce more offspring and continue the DNA being passed on generation to generation. Descent with modification, you have to have descent to have natural selection. So even though it might cost a parent more energy and maybe even their life potentially to take care of their offspring, it's worth it in terms of their DNA being passed on. This idea of passing on your DNA is the big priority, the kind of goal for a lot of organisms in a very primitive kind of manner. Has led to 3 different main survivorship strategies, and we describe them with different curves. So we have strategy number 1 with a curve number 1, and strategy number 2 with the straight line here, and strategy number 3 over here. So let's talk about what these actually look like. So type 1, like humans, have fewer offspring, but they take care of them for a very long time. So if you look here of the percentage survival of 100% of the babies that are born, this is how many are going to live to the maximum lifespan. So most type 1 are going to live for a very long time, about half the lifespan, but middle age, they start to die, but as slowly, and they kind of die off a lot more near the end. But most of them live to be older age, and that's very common in type 1. And a big part of that is because parental care is so high. They're taking care of their offspring for so long. They're really solid start in life. So for example, in humans, how long will your parents take care of you? How long do my parents take care of me? Well, for a long time. I stayed at home until I was 17, and they still take care of to this day for a lot of stuff. I need help, and they just send me things to be nice because they care about me and they love me. It's part of type 1 strategies and also part of culture as well. So why would this evolve? Why was it beneficial for ancient hominids to take care of their offspring for so long? Well, one key part of that is often in type 1 species, the offspring aren't at an age to reproduce for many years. So in humans, you're not at reproductive age until you're technically like 14, 13, 14. You're old enough to and be biologically able to reproduce. Doesn't mean you should, definitely should not. But that's a long time to take care of an offspring until it's old enough to pass on its DNA to the next generation. But that ensures it's much more likely that that offspring will survive and pass on its DNA. And then we have the opposite extreme over here is type 3. So in type 3, example here, this is an oyster, and these are all little tiny eggs being hatched here, being laid. They have hundreds or thousands of offspring. So they're a huge number, and look here, most of them die almost immediately, and the death rate kind of slows down, and the few that are left for a long time. A lot of fish, plants, shellfish all do this, and a big part of this is they don't take care of their offspring at all. They lay an egg, it's fertilized, and then they're done. There is zero parental care here. So why would that evolve? What's the advantage for that? There has to be some sort of selection pressure for that to evolve. Well, the idea is that it was such a huge number that some of them are going to escape predation, some of them are going to be able to survive because you had so many eggs, so many seeds, so many whatever that are released. But then that parent can focus on laying more eggs the next generation and taking care of themselves. So it's maybe a more challenging environment to live in. Maybe they can't focus their energy on taking care of offspring, and their strategy instead is just to produce a huge number of offspring regularly, and knowing most of them are not going to survive very long, but a few of them will survive a very long time. Okay, and our third one here, our type 2, that's the middle. So on this one, the offspring have about 10 to 20 offspring a year. It varies quite a bit, but they usually have a decent, a mid-range number of offspring per year, and they take care of them for a little while, but not for super long time like they do in type 1. So example here are squirrels. Why would that evolve? Well, in these organisms, maybe they have, often happens in seasonal places where they have an abundance of food resources available to them in the spring and summer, but it gets hard in the winter, so they can have the extra energy available to take care of their offspring in the spring and summer, but when winter comes, you gotta fend for yourself. And it's beneficial for them to get their offspring kind of started and to a good level of energy and size, but then let them go and they can do the next set of offspring. Okay, so a way to connect this back to ecology is you think about carrying capacity and population size. In type 1 species, they tend to kind of maintain their population at carrying capacity, so at the level that the ecosystem can sustain. So they don't waste energy producing offspring that we're not going to have the resources to survive. They only produce as much as to kind of maintain at that level, maybe a little bit above, but it'll shoot back down again. They don't go crazy above carrying capacity. Whereas type 3 are the opposite. They go for exponential population growth, and if there's not enough resources, there's too many predators, then most of them will die, and that's okay because there's so many of them that a few are probably still going to survive. Let's look at some other examples here. So here I have 3 examples. I want you to think to yourself, which type is each one? So we have a squirrel, and these are gray squirrels. They have 2 litters from 1 to 9 babies every year. 1 in the early spring, 1 in the early summer. Maple trees, once they're mature, they produce thousands of samaras every year. There's these little seeds here called samaras. Some people call them whirligigs or helicopters. Their official biological name is samara. And we have polar bears. Polar bears have 2 cubs once every 3 years or so when the female is mature. And they take care of their cubs usually for the first year. So hopefully you guys got this right. You possibly didn't thought about this for a second here. So squirrels are definitely type 2. They have a median number of offspring, but they take care of them for a little while, but not for forever. Trees and most plants are type 3, produce lots and lots of all those smears in this tree, but they don't take care of them at all. And then we have polar bears, are an example of type 1. They have fewer offspring and they take care of them for a longer period of time. Okay, which leads us to the final kind of idea here is applying all this to sexual selection. So there's two kinds of sexual selection, intersexual and intrasexual, and those are different. So keep those straight, inter and intra. So sexual selection is a type of natural selection when the sexes are going to have distinct features, distinct traits, because one sex is choosy or the niches are going to compete to mate. Those are the two kind of situations in which one of the sexes will have some sort of traits that are distinct because of that selection pressure. So in intersexual selection, the T-E-R, means between different things. So here it's different sexes, the females and the males together for this kind of selection. The females will choose which male they're going to mate with. So here we have a peacock and a peahen, and the peahen will decide if she's going to mate with that peacock or not. It's up to her to make the choice. So in terms of energy, why does this really make a lot of sense? Well, as we know in sexual reproduction, the females put a way more energy into this process than males do. So in terms of evolution, it makes sense that they would want to have the best DNA possible and choose the best male they possibly can find to be the father of their offspring. If they're going to spend energy and risk their own survival to reproduce, they want to make sure that those babies they produce have the best DNA it possibly can have. Often in these species that have intersexual selection, the males are going to have very specific traits, like these crazy coloration patterns. Here's a bird of paradise, a male, and here's a female of the same species. Maybe they can dance. So birds of paradise have dances. They can do, and it's a way to show the females how high quality their DNA is. So for example, birds of paradise, a male like this, or a peacock too, their coloration makes them stand out at predators. Horrible camouflage. If you're a predator trying to get a bird to eat, you're going to pick this one over this one. It's way easier to see. And if you have a peacock with a giant tail, think of how easy it would be for a predator to grab onto that tail. So these are ways that it really makes it harder for them to survive. So the logic behind this is that if the male has traits that make it harder for him to survive, but he still manages to survive, that means he must be really good, really fast, really good at hiding, really something that allows him to survive, and he must have really good DNA. And he has the energy and the nutrient level to be able to put energy into making himself these crazy bright colors. It takes a lot of nutrients and energy to do this and to grow these big tail feathers and things. So how does that fit with natural selection? Well, let's look at the peacock. The peahen, there would have been variation in the male peacock coloration, tail size, all those kinds of things. There's variation in the population. The overproduction competition part of it comes from the fact that the females are going to choose which males to mate with, who have the biggest tails, the brightest colors. The adaptation is the fact that the females are choosing those traits, the biggest tails, brightest colors to mate with, and the brighter their colors are, the bigger their tails, the more likely they are to be able to mate. And some modification is only those ones who are able to convince the females that they are the best are able to actually mate. So this is a very clear example of natural selection happening. Now the other type of sexual selection is called intrasexual selection. And intra, the prefix intra, means among the same. So in this case, it's males that will compete. So multiple males will compete, usually fighting, to mate with the females. And the male who wins gets to mate. So in those species, the males are going to have specific traits that help them fight. So example would be the ossicones of giraffes. We talked at the very beginning of our unit about ossicones as an example of a trait that has evolved for fighting. Horns of mountain goats that help them to fight, the rams. These are all examples of traits that developed in males to allow them to fight, and the bigger they are, the more they're to win a fight and therefore pass on their genes. So only the male who wins the competition gets to mate. So again, how does that fit with natural selection? Well, if we think about the four principles, always go back to the four principles. There is variation in the horn size of male rams. The competition part of it, the overproduction part of it, is only the rams who win the fights get to mate. Adaptation, the males who have the biggest horns are more likely to be able to win a fight and therefore mate. Descent modification, only the males who win and get to mate will pass on their genes to the next generation. So, of the three survivorship the strategies we looked at, type 1, type 2, and type 3 earlier in this lesson, which type or which types do you think are most likely to use sexual selection? Well, type 3 is definitely not going to use it because it's just sending out zero parental care. Very little energy put into it, it's probably not going to use that. Type 1 is very likely to use it because the parents are putting a lot of parental care, the females are putting a lot of parental care and taking care of those offspring. In some species, the males help as well, but in some, only the females do it, like in polar bears. And in type 2, it depends. So in some species, like birds, we definitely can have sexual selection, some of them, but not all of them. And usually it's if the female is going to do more work than the male. Okay, so we're going to have you guys apply this knowledge. You're going to analyze 2 little video clips going to be linked on Schoology about this, examples of sexual selection. And for each of them, you're going to answer these 3 questions. Okay, talk about how that trait evolved and include all 4 principles. I noticed in the quiz, because we weren't talking about all 4 principles, we're going to practice that again before the unit test. Make sure you talk about all 4 principles of natural selection. Talk about how the energy for reproduction is shared between the parents. Does the female do more? Does the male do more? Is it mostly equal? That kind of thing. And talk about what type of survivorship you think is going to be and describe it for that particular species. Okay, so let's practice so you can get some feedback from your teacher when you post your pictures on Schoology. And look at some cool videos. Okay, so your homework is to upload the pages from today's lesson, the 2 pages of notes. You have to also include big idea number 3. And make sure you do your analysis, 2 examples, and post your answers in your notes so that we can get feedback from your teacher and make sure you're understanding and applying the skills that we've been working on, the knowledge we've been working on, because your test is coming up, guys. You only have a few more lessons left. Okay, I hope this is helpful for you. As always, if you have any questions, please ask your teacher. I hope everyone's staying home and staying safe.